This is the Let's Grab Coffee podcast, and I'm your host, George Khalife.
Hey, what's going on? Hope you had a great week. I know it's Friday morning. Hopefully you have that coffee right next to you, ready to go, ready to tackle the day. I'm super excited to bring you this episode specifically because I know you're absolutely going to love it. I got a lot of value from it, so here we go. I sit down with Dr. Chris Stout, whose career includes business, government, and nonprofits. He's traveled the world, and by world I mean 100 countries, published 38 books, won a wide range of accolades. In fact, Purdue named a scholarship in his honor. He's founded a kindergarten in Tanzania, was interviewed on Oprah, CNBC, CNN, NPR. He's a licensed clinical psychologist and founding director of the Center for Global Initiatives, a top-rated healthcare nonprofit. He's even in the entrepreneurial space, both as an advisor and an angel investor. He is Dr. Chris Stout. What was your knack to sort of get in this field? Like, what was the passion behind it, the motivation?
Well, thank you, George. It's good to be on it. That's a great starter question. It was a little bit like how I've gotten into a variety of other things, sort of inadvertently or accidentally. I started off actually in undergrad as a math major. I just was really kind of a proverbial math geek and really enjoyed that. And back in the day, this was when dinosaurs walked the earth. So it was kind of pre-computer science. So you basically started off as a math undergrad in the School of Science and then took programming classes and whatnot. So you had to take some liberal arts classes. I took a psychology class. I'd never taken any in high school or anything, and then just really fell in love with it. So the nice thing was that the psychology department was also in the School of Science, so a lot of the credits I'd already taken would transfer in, and then I just really kind of went to town with it. Psychology is so vast and diverse with so many different kinds of areas. I actually wound up, if memory serves, I think with my undergrad degree, I had like 52 credits just in psychology. I think I took about every psychology class they had, and I became a TA for abnormal psych, etc. And the whole abnormal psych kind of, with some research projects we did for summer work study too, kind of said, I really want to go to graduate school. I mean, to really do anything, that the old joke with what do you do with an undergrad degree in psychology? Well, you apply to graduate school. So that's exactly what I did, and really wanted to get involved in a program that had a very clinical orientation. The one that I was involved in was specifically connected to a hospital system. That hospital system was connected to residential treatment, outpatient therapeutic day schools. So long story short, that was kind of my starter. And just because I was always a little, interested in a variety of other kinds of things, simultaneously, once I was finished my degree and got licensed and got into practice, I had a small private practice where I worked with families and children, but then also got involved in administrative things within the hospital and within the day schools, and always liked to teach. So I would teach a class here and there adjunctively at other graduate school programs in clinical psych, and then got administratively involved with in that hospital system, like I said, but then also with helping out with other startups. The professional school teaching kind of evolved into being involved with a couple of the medical schools in the Chicago area. I was on faculty in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences for a while at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine, and then probably really spent my most time in at University of Illinois at Chicago and their College of Medicine and Department of Psychiatry. And again, kind of being a little bit Mr. Magoo with this, during that time, I had done some work with actually the Department of Emergency Medicine, which is a story for another day, but that led to a great relationship with a fellow named Tim Erickson, who is the residency director of that. He got tapped to become the first director of their Center for Global Health, which was an interest that I had as well. Right. And that then was sort of got me more into the field and trajectory of public health and global health.
Kind of wanted to ask, like, I know your entrance into psychology, a lot of it is around mental health, and I know a lot of the stuff you do on the side, whether it's endurance training or exercise or just living a fit life, I know that's super important to you. But for a lot of people kind of in entrepreneurship and business, the vision for mental health kind of always gets put on the side for most of it. It's not
Yeah.
something you typically focus on.
Hmm.
And coming from the Middle East, Chris, I think there's a weird negative connotation towards it. Like if you say, I'm focusing on my mental health, you get these weird raised eyebrows. Like people just don't take that seriously.
Right.
What was that like? I guess for one, why is it so important to you? And two, what would you say for people listening that they could do even just kind of today as a head start to start really thinking about their mental health and taking it seriously?
A great question, George. Thank you. I guess maybe to start off, to kind of unpack that, because there's a lot of parts to that question, to what I would think for hopefully a helpful answer. I think, stigma, it doesn't matter kind of where anybody's from. I think there still is sort of just levels of degree, perhaps, of stigma with mental health issues. For some reason, there's always kind of like this classic blaming the victim. If someone, um, you know, uh, gets pancreatic cancer, no one blames them that they got pancreatic cancer, and they treat them with typically great sympathy and empathy and how can I be of help. But if someone else says, I feel like I can't get out of bed in the morning because I'm so depressed, and people maybe don't have a context to understand that. For example, someone might have greater empathy and sympathy towards someone to say, well, you just lost a loved one, your parent just died, or there's been some kind of tragic event in your life, and then people have a context to understand that. But without that context, oftentimes people have a very difficult time having that same level of humane empathy back towards the person that might be suffering with something that might be more psychologically or behaviorally based. Sometimes those kinds of problems also manifest in ways that upset people. Sometimes people will self-medicate for anxiety and depression with drugs or alcohol. And then it gets into a blaming the victim paradigm where people then say, well, I'm mad at you because you drink too much, or because you use substances, too often, or, you're a bad parent because you're doing that, or a bad partner, or what have you. So all of those things, I think, sort of add up to that. It's sort of ironic to me, and I guess you're asking a psychologist this question, but most all of the kinds of issues that people deal with, again, are a matter of degree when it comes to behavioral health. Pardon me. We all feel anxious at some point. There's no human being that I know of that's never experienced some degree of anxiety at some point in time in their life. Maybe it was before they got married, or maybe it was before a final, or maybe some big event or whatever. So people can understand what that feeling's like. I think people sometimes also have likely experienced a sad time, or a down mood, or the blues, or varying levels of depression based again upon certain kinds of circumstances in their lives. But we for some odd reason, tend to disconnect that, even when it's with our friends or our loved ones who are doing that in a situation that we don't think justifies feeling anxious or depressed. So having said that, I think for ourselves, some people just are naturally anxious. Some people are naturally pessimistic. Some people are naturally optimistic. Some people are naturally happy and upbeat. So when we're different from whatever it is that we might be, and that difference is something that feels uncomfortable or alien in a negative kind of way for us, that perhaps is the first thing, regardless of stigma or regardless of whatever else we might think or believe about mental health kinds of issues, becomes an opportunity to say, whoa, this is happening to me. What can I do about that? There's a variety of things. I mean, there's, and advice is kind of difficult to give because, one size fits few, but basically, depending upon what the person's problem is, there can be just sometimes creating a change in your life of, self-care, of tweaking your diet, of maybe getting more exercise or better quality sleep, or going back to a favorite hobby that maybe someone has stopped doing because they've gotten so busy with their startup, or because their job has become so demanding, that oftentimes those are the self-care kinds of things, the things that we might misinterpret as trivial or unimportant, go by the wayside. Sometimes family becomes that way too. People, say, well, the most important thing in my life is my children, or my partner, my spouse, my family, etc., my parents. And when people get busy, it's oftentimes, ironically, those are the first things that kind of, are left on their own to take care of themselves. So oftentimes it's recognizing that there is some difference that's unwanted, thinking about what's different today than at a time when I wasn't feeling this way, and then taking some proactive action to get back to those areas and times and places where things were a better time, and to see if that might be helpful.
Mhm.
Sometimes that does the trick, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes trying something new and different can be helpful. Sometimes people find meditation helpful if they've never meditated before. Sometimes bringing more exercise into their life can be helpful if they've been more, sedentary, etc. And sometimes going and seeing a healthcare professional, in particular, my bias would be a psychologist, to get counsel on, pardon me, what can I do different? Getting an assessment done, and then getting a very proactive approach to dealing with whatever the problems are. And oftentimes those problem-solving kinds of approaches can scale to different bigger problems in the future, which will inevitably happen to all of us, and can be very helpful in terms of getting through whatever that difficulty or that bump in the road is at that point in time. But being able to have better tools, pardon me, I've got a bad voice today, having better tools in our toolkit that we can use and other times to be able to make life better for ourselves and those that we care about.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think what I love most about your answer, and it's not sort of the traditional one, is like, typically you'll ask this, and an answer may be around kind of medication, right? I mean, hopefully not, but unless it's really warranted. But what I love about your answer, it's really about, picking a hobby, making sure you're exercising, watching what you eat, getting enough sleep. And I think I've seen this even within myself, and I think everybody obviously goes through a funk, right? I mean, I've definitely felt days where I think I did feel, depressed for different reasons, right? It might be working on something that doesn't give me energy. It might be, realizing that I'm not exercising to the point where I should be, and it's kind of draining me. And I think just kind of realizing those points in life is super important. Another one recently that I kind of wanted to ask you about, because I've been seeing it surfaced a bit more, is meditation. I'm not sure if you personally meditate, but I've been seeing meditation as a linkage to more positive mental health a bit more recently, and kind of wanted to get your take on it.
Yeah, I have attempted with meditation in a variety of different kinds of ways. I will periodically, when I'm really kind of, at a high stress point, the kinds of things that I'll do, I've used I've got probably like 5 meditation apps on my phone. But the one that I use the most, and that's still sadly episodic. I mean, I really do want to try and embed that as more of a routine thing rather than a, break glass in case of emergency kind of thing, which is how I use it now, is Calm. I really like Calm. I like the person's voice in it. I like the ability to, for some reason, for me, just the audio stuff is really nice, and I really enjoy the one of like raindrops on leaves in the forest. For some reason, I've listened to storms. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah. I've listened to waves, all these other things. But for some reason, and maybe it's just I've conditioned that myself now as well too, kind of behaviorally, that when I start to hear that, I immediately, probably, sort of feel better and feel like my blood pressure's, probably gone down a few points as well too. But I've also done what's called progressive muscle relaxation, which isn't probably necessarily meditation, but it can be certainly used that way. I found that very helpful, and probably something I've been most consistently incorporating, because you can kind of really do it anywhere. You can do it 30 seconds before getting up to the dais to give a talk. You can do it. I did it yesterday before I had a meeting driving in my car. Different kinds of breathing techniques. And there's like someone referred to a menu of breathing techniques, which I really liked, because I thought, sometimes you need the hardcore ones. You're really hungry and you need it. Sometimes you just need a little light snack of a little, tweak and tune up. But the whole, there's a budding, or already existing, but I think it's growing, science around the whole physiology of how our bodies react when we've changed our breathing patterns. And I've also with a little bit of a jaundiced eye, perhaps. Looked into the Wim Hof breathing styles and things like that.
Yeah.
There's no way I get even close to anything like the stuff that he does, and I've never really taken the training. I've downloaded one of his manuals, but again, it's one of those things on my to-do list. But I find that very, very helpful. So. And I know people that really find benefit from it. There's meditation retreats, there's no talking meditation retreats, there's, all these other kinds of things. So my best advice is, when you find something that works, keep with it. Don't expect that it will always work at the same strength all the time under all situations. Nothing does. People take ibuprofen because aspirin doesn't work, et cetera. So nothing is always kind of the magic, silver bullet for every ill. But I think maybe the lesson from that is to iterate, to pivot, to try something different, see if it works this time. If it doesn't, keep looking and keep trying to find something and problem solve around it. But I've probably the episodic thing that I've done has been more like transcendental meditation, where there's a repetitive nonsense mantra kind of thing, and that I found very valuable. But I still find my mind drifting off and whatnot. So I'm a work in progress on that. So how about you? Do you have a practice, or is this something you're interested in personally?
Yeah, well, funny you bring up a couple of points. So I've never done the silent meditation, although I have a close friend of mine in Toronto who has done that. He really recommended it. I mean, I think for a lot of extroverts that would probably seem like the scariest thing to ever do in life, but
yeah,
like myself, someone social and stuff, I'd want to like befriend everybody in this retreat.
As a podcast host, that would be tough.
Like, I don't know, I just need to put out a story, but so obviously he had really good things to say about that, kind of a different experience. I've been doing Wim Hof's method in terms of cold showers recently, so not necessarily meditation, but for me personally, I think, and what I've tried to do is kind of embed breathing, to your point, in different ways. I had a friend of mine in Ottawa who's Indian, and one time his dad invited me over to his house at like 6 a.m. It was one of those like monk stories that you often hear in movies. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. I'm going to a buddy who's like a first generation Indian and teaching me a method called Kapalbhati. And they're like different breathing techniques. And I was like intently listening and trying to do this. And so I think what I really try to do is more apply the breathing techniques when I feel anxious. To your point, like, let's say I have a big presentation. I think we all feel the tightness of breathing, right? You start basically not breathing anymore, or it's like shallow breaths.
Right.
And you start like your stress starts building up. So I think that's super important. And the last thing I'll say on that is yoga. Like, yoga has really helped me breathe a bit more. And the reason is, like, you're doing all these tough exercises, like a downward dog, for example, and the instructor tells you to hold it for like 5 minutes and then tells you to breathe, and you're just looking like, I'm about to die in this hot sauna room. This is not okay, right? So anyway, these are some things I do.
That's a good point, because one of the things that's sort of been on my ever-growing list and needing to get to is to insinuate more yoga into actually kind of my health routine, so to speak. Yeah. So I find, as my miles increase on running, or as, I'm rotating some kind of set of, lifting exercises or whatever, I just become so much more tight and stiff. So, So one of the things I've tried to do, because I like to work out in the mornings, is then, like, in what I've told myself, and I won't tell you how consistent or inconsistent I've been with this, but is that like 3 evenings a week, with the days done, I haven't had dinner yet or anything, I have like a half-hour yoga from I don't know if you're familiar with Tony Horton. He had like P90X, and he's got a P90X3 that's been out for a number of years now. So it's like a 30-minute, one of them is yoga, and it's a 30-minute yoga that's, you can, the nice thing about their stuff is that you can kind of tweak it. So if there's certain exercises that you can rock at, you can do the hard one. And if there's certain things that you're still kind of, a newbie and a beginner at, or just, it's just hard for you for whatever reason, you can, make an accommodation. You can use a yoga block, or you can,
Right.
do something different. And I found that is very helpful. So that's kind of my game plan is, just to really kind of make that not a substitute for a workout, but an augmentation to, if it's a running day, then that's one of the days that evening I need to, really make sure I get that yoga in.
Yeah, it's super helpful. I mean, last thing I'll say on this, to your point, especially if you're running, like let's say you're training for a marathon. I know for me, I had a sort of inflamed IT band, and just kind of integrating yoga or at least some progressive stretching in there really, really helps.
Yeah.
So definitely recommend it. I did want to ask, so I came across something really interesting in one of the things I was reading about you, and it's basically titled like battling mediocrity, which I found really interesting. And I kind of assumed why, and given your sort of personality and the things you love to do, it makes a lot of sense. But I kind of wanted to get your take, like what do you define first of all as mediocrity, and what do you do personally to overcome that?
Well, again, it's probably, different variations and different shades for different people. But I feel like just kind of same old, just kind of doing the same thing, being in a rut. There's the old cliched joke of, the only difference between a grave and a rut is the length and the depth. So that's kind of what I think is mediocrity. I mean, I feel like, there's certain things that I am definitely mediocre on and will always be mediocre on because they don't really matter a whole lot to me. So I think that's fine. I give myself the pass on that, that's okay. But the stuff that's truly important, for anybody, whatever that might be, I mean, no matter what a person's, whatever position or status or relationships or job or whatever it is you want to look at someone, whatever lens you want to look at them through, that if it's something you care about, then you should really rock it. You should really, and again, I will always be a mediocre runner, I will never, win anything or whatever, but I enjoy running, but, so that's fine. And I am at peace with that. But, when it comes to my career, or when it comes to time with my family, or when it comes to, certain kinds of things, I feel like, at some levels, maybe like you want to be a craftsman with it, so to speak. Like you really want to, like I might spend an inordinate amount of time on a couple of paragraphs on some paper that I'm writing, because I really want to get the message across. I want it to be clear. I want it to be clever. I want it to be engaging. And I want to have an economy of words. I don't want to be too wordy. I want it to be taught. So, and it's for lots of folks, it's just, really, my emails are not that way. I'm fine to have mediocre emails, but, when it's stuff that's important to a person, whatever those things are, and they vary, again, probably from time to time and, phase of life and circumstance. But that, they're probably, for all of us, there are things, people might call it, their passion or their passion project or, whatever. And that's, I totally get that, and that's fine. But I feel like that's almost kind of, been overused, somewhat. So my thinking of it is just that, there's certain things that we want to be rock stars on, that really we dig, we enjoy, we go into flow. Those are the places, to battle your own personal mediocrity. And then if there's opportunities where there might be visibility for that, which is definitely an option, not a requirement, then maybe you can inspire other people around those same kinds of things. It may not be the task at hand, but it may be the process at hand, how you go about deconstructing something to then go do whatever it is that you love doing, like a Tim Ferriss might, deconstruct something. So that's kind of that's my general point of, what I think about that, and trying to be championing, people to, hey, let's go, whatever your thing is, rock your thing, make that really exciting, and it'll make it even more, you'll feel that person, I suspect, will feel even better about it themselves.
Yeah, well, even like linking this back to mental health, when we were talking about that, like it's so important just to actually set a goal that somewhat makes you uncomfortable, psychologically, and that when you look back on, to your point, talking about the process, that's so enjoyable. Like running your first marathon might seem crazy, even if it's just 5 kilometers, but you set that date 4 months out. You do a couple of runs a week, and you see yourself progressing, and every run you feel better, you're breathing better. You look in the mirror and you just feel good, you look good. You're not self-conscious about taking off your shirt anymore. Like, I think those small tiny improvements and courses of action just lead to such tremendous results, I think, psychologically, and that, I think, trickles in different parts of your life. I mean, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I really like how you said that, because I think one of the other benefits to that process is that, okay, using your example spot on of like wanting to go run a marathon or a 5K or whatever you want to run,
Mm-hmm.
that process does a variety of things. That process probably makes you focus on your eating a little differently than if you didn't
Right.
have a race coming up. That process may get you out socially with some other folks, with some other runners. So you've got some friends to, you're having a social time as well as an exercise time. If you've told other people about it, then you've maybe inadvertently created an accountability group
Good.
that says,
Yeah.
hey George, how's that running going? You go, oh, or I know they're going to ask me about that at work, so I better not slough off on Sunday, because they're going to ask me to do my long run on Monday when I show up at work, kind of a thing. So I have found that those kinds of things, and to your point, feeling good about how when you look at yourself in the mirror, those are all, there's you probably sleep better, you probably drink less, or don't drink at all, or whatever. All these kinds of things kind of go part and parcel with, in what you might say in your head is, I have this one goal to run this race. Well, but then you have maybe 10 other things that you've tweaked in your life. Those little, what might seem little, all start to add up. And they can add up negatively too, in the opposite direction. Well, I'm going to sit on the couch, I'm going to binge on Netflix, I'm going to, eat a cake, I'm going to not work out, I'm going to, do whatever. So all those little things, well, what's the big deal if I, and there's probably no big deal if you do it just, every so often, but if you do it all the time, those little things all the time can add up to positive things if they're healthy, or not so positive things if they're problematic. So that's why I really encourage people. I feel like there's a lot of things that people can do, that might be like by outward appearance, like you're moving in one goal direction, and it is that. It's not untrue. But you then, as the person doing whatever that is, start to see all these other kind of little interstitial benefits and things that you go, I'm gonna keep this up. This is, eating this way is really great. Or doing this, having this kind of exercise, really helps me have a solid night's sleep, etc. These are kind of cool habits, nice side effects, if you will. And to your point about, mental health and stuff, generally people, exercise is one of the key things that people often prescribe in the behavioral health field, because it's so beneficial, and so in these ways that you've just described, as well as emotionally and as well as cognitively. We think more clearly, we're more oxygenated. For me, it's like a time for me. We've talked about meditation here, but not that I meditate when I run, but my mind gets kind of clear after about the first, half mile to mile. And I take a little mini recorder. I don't run with a phone. I run with this little mini recorder, because I find that by the second half of my run, there's like 5 things that I've thought about that I want to, add to my to-do list, or some solution to a problem that I want to try out.
Yeah.
And I don't want to lose those by the time I get home. So I come home and I'll joke with my wife. She'll say, "How was your run?" I said, "Well, I have 8 new things that I thought about that I didn't think about before my run." So, so I get mutual benefit from all these things. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, like, that it's almost like that runner's high, or that mental clarity you get from running. Especially when it's nice out. Like, I went for a run on Sunday, and it was, I think, 2 degrees. And the first thing I did, it was sunny in Chicago, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to go run by the lake. And it was the first run I do outside. So I was super stoked about that.
That's great. Yeah.
Why do you think psychologically people tend to lean more towards comfort? Like, say, for example, you set your alarm at 5 a.m., right? You want to join the 5 a.m. club. Oh, yeah, it's January 2nd, and you're pumped, man. I'm about to hit the gym. And 5:05 rolls by, and you're like still hitting the snooze button. The mattress is super comfortable, and you're just a cozy duck. Like, why does that happen? Or when you come from work, you're supposed to be doing your side hustle, maybe it's a
Hmm.
podcast, but oh man, that couch looks so good.
Yeah,
There's a new documentary on Netflix. I mean, yeah, just an
yeah,
hour, and then an
yeah,
hour becomes 5 hours. Like, why does that happen?
right. Well, um, it's like discipline sort of becomes this bad four-letter word, and it's hard. There's a number of books out there. I think is it Adam Grant that talks about like atomic habits or the
Yeah.
power of habits and things like that. And I think it's kind of human nature. We tend to habituate, and maybe we tend to regress to the mean. And if something is more comfortable, then that feels good. And what feels good is I don't mean to say addictive like a substance is addictive, but in the scale of things, it can be very similar,
Hmm.
that we do what gives us pleasure. At some level, most all folks have a certain, hedonistic, kind of proclivity. There's certain things that we, like I'm just lately, maybe I don't know if this is a good example of a comfortable thing, but I've just really been one of my things for 2020 was to focus on spending more time in the sauna. And I've kind of conditioned the first little bit of it. It was like, okay, let's just get in there, think about other stuff, get your head someplace else. And within a relatively short period of, and I don't do it every day, but within a relatively short period of time, I've been able to increase it because I'm geeky and wonky. I've got like this watch that measures my pulse, and I, track, if I can get my pulse rate up, and I screw around with breathing while I'm in the sauna to see what effect that has, and so I sort of create all these other kinds of distractions that are pleasurable for me and that I know move me towards a goal. And if, and you also sometimes have to take a very sober thing to say, okay, I'm going to try this out. Okay, this is dumb, or this is not for me, or I hurt myself every time I try and do this. Maybe this isn't the time for me to keep, trying and, to do parkour running or, whatever thing it might be. So, it is so much easier. The amount of effort to hit that snooze button at 5 o'clock when your bed's all warm and it's 0 degrees outside, or to turn the water, from that nice warm shower to, ice water for, however long that you can stand it, kind of a thing. So, but I feel like for me, when I've had those and I still, I deal with that all the time. When I have things that I haven't been able to kind of push through, then I revert back to my cognitive little checklist to say, okay, why, why am I doing this? Here's 4 good reasons. Okay, are those legit reasons? Are those baloney reasons? They're legit. Okay, well then, I need to kind of push through it. And then it becomes an odds kind of thing, or a numbers kind of thing to say, okay, maybe I have a cheat day. Maybe there's one day where I can sleep
Yeah.
in, and that's okay. And I allow myself that, and I don't beat myself up. And that sometimes has this paradoxical effect that I know if I can have that one, like, okay, Chris, you can sleep in, not on Thursday, but on Saturday. And on Saturday, you can sleep in an hour and a half, not just, 10 minutes. So let's bank that, sleep in thing. And that can help bolster, my own self-discipline around that as an example, or those kinds of things for us. So I think to get back to your kernel of the question for this is that what defining for ourselves what is important, and then structuring ways to go about doing that can be then the way that we have to have that very tough talk with ourselves to say, yes, get out on the road, put on your shoes, go get your miles in. If you've got a race coming up, you can't, hit the snooze alarm for your training. Otherwise, you're really going to be mad at yourself because you're going to suffer through a race that you don't have to suffer through, but you got, slack on your consistency with your training, kind of a thing. So, and same kind of, people have temptations in their relationships to do dumb things. And,
Hmm.
you just need to kind of have that, you get like the again, the old joke of like, the little devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, telling you to do the right thing or to not do the right thing. So you just really sometimes have to think back about that and think about your end goal, your end game, and will I'm at this fork in the road. If I choose this, will it get me closer towards what I want to be, or will it set me back, or will it keep me at neutral? Is this a big deal or a little deal? Can I use it as part of my, my cheat day? I can have a pizza today, but no, I can't have a pizza every day. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, and it also feels so much better when you actually deserve a reward. Like I've been doing intermittent fasting as of late, and I fast 16 hours. I'm actually going to eat right after the podcast. So thank you for keeping me a little bit distracted.
Okay.
In a very good way.
Same thing, man. I haven't eaten yet today either. So
there you go. We're partners in crime here.
That's
Chris.
right. We'll hold each other accountable.
And it feels so good, like when you have that first meal. And I've been using an app called Zero. I don't know if you ever use that, but it's a great app. Yeah, it's a great app to track your fasting. And just to your point, I just feel like when you actually deserve a cheat day, like let's say Saturday, it's your day where you can have a donut, let's say, or you can binge watch a series. You don't feel as bad about it, like mentally. Whereas if you do it for 5 days during the week and you just know that it's bad, it's almost progressive, and like it makes you feel even worse every single day. Yeah. And your point, I love the checklist thing, because I listen to Jocko Willinig's podcast a lot, and he says discipline equals freedom. And that's what we love, and it sucks. A lot of things we don't like to do. It's not that I enjoy going to the gym or you enjoy running a marathon or training for one, for that matter. But I think it's sometimes doing these things actually creates much more of a freedom than you realize. Yeah. I wanted to ask, so on this point, I know you mentioned Adam Grant. Funny, I was actually listening to him this morning. He talks about procrastination a lot in a weirdly positive way, right? Like he brings up like anecdotal things like, Da Vinci used to procrastinate a shit ton. Like it took him 16 years to work on a project. So could that be a good thing for people who, in a creative lens?
Yeah, you're asking a very biased person about that. So, I joke that I'm, very obsessive compulsive and perfectionistic about things, and again, everything's all kind of probabilistic. It's sort of like 90% of the time, or whatever. There's you might have heard of this too, or your listeners might have, like the old joke about the rider and the white shoe, and it's sort of like this person who. Well, there's this proverbial writer, and they're kind of sitting there in front of their keyboard or their typewriter or their pad of paper, and they're just sitting there not getting anything down, and they look over and they see their shoes, which happen to be white, and there's a spot on one of the shoes. So they then spend like the next 2 hours, delicately, craftsman-like getting that spot off their shoe, as opposed to sitting down and writing whatever their goal was to be able to produce that day. And for me, I think it goes back to, I have struggled throughout my life with anxiety. And for me, I think there might be certain tasks that are probably more external kinds of deliverables. I need to review something for a startup, or I need to get something done for a class I'm teaching, or I have, there's some external kind of something, and there's probably a deadline to it, and it's very important, like very important, capital V, very. And I know I've got to get it done, but maybe I just don't feel like my head is in that smart spot that I need to be able to answer these questions, or that I still need to do some other research before I can help these guys with their pitch deck. And doing that research is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And it's going to be a 3-hour job, and I've got only a gap of 45 minutes before my next meeting or whatever. So in that sense, because I want to do a good job, it probably disproportionately becomes even a bigger deal than the big deal that it already was. And I get nervous about it. So I never just sit and do nothing. I probably, I'd clean my shoe, but it wouldn't take me 2 hours. But I try to then say, okay, Chris, you got all these other things that you got to do. Look at this. Like I literally have a paper to-do list that I tweak all the time. And it's like, okay, well, here's 4 other things that you could probably get done. They're not, this is going to like fly in the face of all the, is it urgent? Is it important? Whatever that matrix was, of productivity. And it's like, well, these things aren't urgent and they're not important, super important, but I could probably get them done in this 45-minute gap that I have done. And then my to-do list will feel less full. I will feel like I got 4 things accomplished. There are 4 things that they're important enough for me to write down to put onto a to-do list, so they do have some, valence and importance. It doesn't get me, in some sense, I guess it does actually. It gets me closer to that bigger goal that I need to carve out the larger amount of time for. But it doesn't make me feel bad about myself. It doesn't make me feel like I've wasted 45 minutes of my day. And if anything, it has kind of cleared the deck where I can then really sit down and spend the deep work kind of time that I need to spend on whatever the larger project is. So, I guess that has overlap with our earlier points about discipline and things like that. So, so I think those kinds of things are kind of my take, my bit of a spin on trying to have what I call productive procrastination, which sounds like a wonderful oxymoron. But, it's not, I'm not so drawn to the siren song of, flipping on, Netflix or hopping on YouTube or something like that for whatever reasons. I don't know. I mean, I enjoy my documentary and docuseries and binging just as much as the next person. But those aren't, when I'm sitting at my desk or wherever in an airport or whatever, those aren't my go-to things. My go-to things tend to be looking at my email list. I kind of have a hierarchical organization of it. When certain things are clear, then I finally get down to the big area that isn't clear. And then, it's sort of like, okay, you got X amount of minutes. How many minutes do you need to clear out, 2 emails that are going to be maybe a little complicated to answer, or you need to put some research or thought into. And that probably honestly has been something that's evolved over the last year and a half or two, and it tends to work for me. So again, the weakness of advice is that one size fits few, but I think the point is to see what in your own psychology of getting things done and your own productivity weaknesses and strengths can you adapt yourself to getting done what needs to get done when it needs to get done in a nice quality way to battle mediocrity, to not be mediocre in getting it done. And that's the hero's journey, so to speak, with getting stuff done for all of us.
Yeah. And I think it's even more important because as I look at your profile, and you mentioned this just now, you're an advisor to a lot of startups. You invest in a couple of them as an angel investor. You're also a humanitarian, doing a lot of projects internationally. You have the psychology work and a bunch of things. I mean, you've published 38 books. That's a lot of stuff. And I think if you look across the spectrum, some might look at the profile and say, well, you're more of a generalist. And I'm wondering kind of your take, because it's always a battlefield. And I've always had this challenge within myself, like, should I be really, really good at this specific thing, or should I be more of a generalist, which I think I am? And to that point, how do you, because I think you answered the first part, how do you overcome mediocrity? But then as a generalist, how do you become really good at doing several things that sometimes don't necessarily overlap?
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I'm not so sure that that's as accurate as I would like it to be, but thank you. It reminds me, your question reminds me of a show I heard with Scott Williams, who is famous for doing his Dilbert cartoon, which is a sort of a great treatise on corporations, I guess worldwide. I was going to say North American, but everywhere really. And he talks about sort of being identified, like everybody can be, pardon me, not everybody can be the world's best writer or novelist or mathematician or physicist or house painter or chef or, pick anything. A few people can. And those few people probably have, in their areas, greater passion than the general public, probably greater innate skill than the general public, et cetera, et cetera. So what Scott Adams advises is that if you can take maybe 2 or 3 different areas that maybe don't necessarily always overlap or neatly connect with one another, then oftentimes you can have a profession or a career or your job, create your job or be an entrepreneur into those areas where those overlaps are. So for me personally, I very much started off, once I got into graduate school, the psychology was it. I mean, I lived it, breathed it. I had, my teaching assistantships were in psychology. I worked full-time and part-time in psychiatric hospitals to make money to pay for tuition. Every single thing I did was very, like most all my hobbies, would be reading psychology journals, sort of a thing. I mean, everything was just really, really, really tweaked to focus on that, because that was the most important thing. I had, student loans I needed to pay off once I got out. I needed to, get a, good job or 2 or 3 or 4 when I got out, et cetera, et cetera. Once I felt like I had some kind of in a sense, a base of that established, then the other interests naturally, organically started to kind of make themselves known. And I think I was lucky because choosing the profession of psychology, there are so many different parts and components. Like I mentioned, 50 some odd credits as an undergrad. That's because there's comparative psychology and social psychology and industrial organizational psychology and clinical psychology and psychopathology and blah, 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 blah. So in being exposed to all those in different kinds of ways, it was sort of like a sampling, an opportunity for me to sample things. And I could start to see other areas that I became much less interested in having a clinical practice after having been in clinical practice for 10 years. That coincided with probably a causal aspect of my wife and I had our first child. So being a child and family psychologist, I only could see children and families in the evenings when the kids aren't in school and the parents aren't at work, and on weekends. Well, my choice was, do I see those people and their children, or do I see my people and my children? So I became zero of a practicing clinical psychologist. I kept my license up because of other things that I was doing, but I was no longer in private practice. I closed that down and then focused on other kinds of things. Those other kinds of things, working in medical schools, gave me exposure to global health and to psychiatry and to other branches and flavors of medicine. So that also then pulled me more into the public health side of things. At University of Illinois Chicago, a lot of the faculty that are part of the Center for Global Health come from a variety of different other kinds of areas. They come from nursing, they come from emergency medicine, and maybe most specifically public health. A lot of them are MD, MPHs. Well, to me, psychology and public health are hugely interconnected and interrelated. So I guess with that long and windy answer to your very specific question, to maybe summarize it, is that I think people need to have a focus and a direction, just like going for the run. In that process of going in that direction, to be open enough to say, maybe this really isn't for me, or to say, yes, this is, but look at all these other kinds of things. Maybe I'll take a little scenic route and a little detour over here for a few years, and I'll work in this other kind of area. Or maybe that working in that other kind of area will be additive for then coming back full force into my one specific kind of career. Let's use career as an example, a career path and direction. Having these other kinds of skills, maybe to make this up, like maybe, I'll take a coding course on a MOOC and then bring that into my clinical research side of things so that I can do more sophisticated analyses of my data. So I'm not going to become a computer scientist. I'm not going to become a data scientist. I'm not going to become a subspecialty statistician, but I'm going to learn enough of those tools to augment and be additive to my day in, day out work that's important to me. So, and then maybe I learn that and then I let that go. I stop looking at it, sort of a thing. So I think my bias is that, it's most helpful, but again, we all differ, to have a focus, to have a direction. So you're not just, a rudderless, boat with a lot of wind in its sails, kind of going, every which direction, sometimes backwards. But to be able to have a direction that you think is good for you today. For me to shift from being a math major to being actually in between, I was an architecture major and then to psychology as a major. But to have direction in those areas, to learn with whatever you're doing in a non-mediocre kind of way in that process, and then to be able to take all those things, I feel like today in my position as a faculty member in an international psychology PhD program, that I can bring my NGO experience, I can bring my global health experience, I can bring my clinical psychology experience, my treating patients experience, my working with families experience, my going on medical missions experience, my humanitarian work with my nonprofit, all those different kinds of things, which you could, kind of compartmentalize as separate, from psychology in some way, shape, or form. But to me, I prefer to have sort of that combination of them and that mix of them. Sometimes some come more to the forefront, sometimes they go further to the background, but all of those things together, I feel, have made me a much better psychologist, a much better faculty member, a much better person, a much better friend, a much more helpful to startups, maybe more successful in the nonprofit that I founded. All those kinds of things. You can't just just be one shade. You need to be a variety of different kinds of skill sets that can come and go.
I love that. Well, I think there's so much really, really concrete advice in that statement. And just one thing I'd add there is funny. If you ever look at the CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, he's actually a part-time DJ.
Right.
So
yes.
I would never imagine.
Who would have thought?
His DJ name is DJ D-Soul. So from the CEOs of the largest investment bank in America, that was a crazy one, but also kind of encouraging, right? Like, if he can do it, why the hell can I? Like, I'm not, he has much more scrutiny on him as a lens and much more regulations. So it's just
I think, unless
it's
somebody
quite interesting
has
to see that.
Unless somebody has something that's like going to get them in trouble, like people do have bad habits and bad hobbies, but otherwise, those kinds of things can be very additive. And even back to our initial part of this conversation of being helpful, with a person's stress relief and mental health. There's no way that guy is depressed when he's spinning. Not at all. There's no way that the stress of his day is bogging him down, when he's in front of an audience. So, that's a very healthy and probably very creative outlet. So, more power to him. And it's also just darn cool.
If you found this podcast useful, make sure to share it out with your community. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the podcast, and I'll see you next time.